and I'm looking forward to it too.
Thank you so much, Ankit. So we're already live, and good morning, everyone, and probably even good afternoon because our stream could go beyond Europe, hopefully, because my co partner today is based in Nepal. So let me start probably with a short introduction. Warm welcome. First and foremost, my name is Katerina. And in my, let's say, civil life, I'm a lawyer, I'm a mom, and I'm also the person who could be called as a seeker. I'm very curious about self awareness, relevant mindset. I always challenge the things like what's in it for me when something is going wrong or when something is going right. And I'm practicing yoga already for more than 13 years and studying psychology nowadays. And today with me, I have Ankit, who is a Tantric Buddhist and Yogi as well. And he's based in Nepal. Uh, we have some noise in the background. Okay, now it's getting better. And Ankit, if I may ask for your introduction, I will try to go on mute.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Katerina. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate uh, the idea that you pitched for this particular meeting, and I'm really looking forward to that. And I think, as far as my introduction is concerned, you've already mentioned a bit about my background. So, of course, I'm a Tantric Buddhist yogi, a teacher, practitioner, but I also come from a secular background, and I used to work as a journalist, also a musician, and I've done different aspects in my life. So I'm quite rooted in the practicalities and you could say the secular aspects of life too. And in my personal work with others, I try to bridge both the ancient and the modern sensibilities, you could say, trying to bridge the gap between Eastern and Western sensibilities mainly, because even though I grew up in the East, in India particularly, but my background was kind of Western secular with my education, especially focused on English literature and journalism. But as I discovered my spiritual path, even though I did research many Western traditions, I'm familiar with many of them too. But ultimately, of course, my heart went back home to the East. And all these years in my personal practice, in my training with my teachers over the years, and then also as a teacher myself, I'm constantly trying to, and not pushing, of course, but consciously trying to bridge this gap between the East and the West. And of course, I would even say not bridging the gap, but understanding how to pick up the best of the both worlds and how that could be utilized to benefit people in the modern age. So I guess even today with our talk, the theme that we have, we might touch upon the same connection too.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know what fascinated me about yourself? It's your diverse background because you had such an interesting journey, coming from journalism, also Western mindset and so on to this, let's say, more spiritual journey. And, probably before we, let's say, deep dive into the topic which we would like to discuss today, I would start probably with the question a little bit about Tantra because I was probably, not 100% aware myself back in the days what Tantra is. And I guess it's quite often in the Western mindset is reduced to, let's say, understanding around some like kind of sexual practices, which is completely wrong. And if you could just like give a little bit of the, background. So what's about Tantra? What's in it for you? Yeah, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And of course, it is quite important to address that before going deeper into a topic because you said it correctly. And I still see in my line of work, connecting with Westerners, and when people hear the word Tantra, a lot of them still have apprehensions about it because unfortunately that's what they have heard about it, right? In Western spiritual circles, mainly utilizing that word incorrectly for certain practices or certain techniques or retreats that are not part of traditional tantra. So I would perhaps not go so much into um, what such individuals are doing, but I would like to shed light on what the traditional meaning of Tantra is. So basically, the word Tantra, first of all, if I want to talk about that, it's a Sanskrit word. And it can be interpreted in different ways, and it's a very ancient tradition. And in fact, it's not just a which different traditions, different even sub traditions coexist. So, for more than 2,000 years, and perhaps even older, if we consider the origins of this path, it germinated in ancient India. Certain scholars of history and religion are also of the opinion that there may have been some influence from ancient Greece and Rome, because ancient Greece and Rome, especially the classical antiquity period and even a bit later, there was some dialogue with ancient India as well. And there's also history of some Greeks moving to parts of ancient India that are now parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And these Greeks, when they moved to those regions, they became Buddhist practitioners, and they were responsible for making the first ever statues of the Buddha. So there's a lot of shared history. So again, talking about what I mentioned before, the bridge between the East and the West, which maybe right now in a modern world, some people might think it is new, but it isn't. If you look at history around 2,000 years ago, we can see a lot of interconnection. Because if we talk about even the Western civilization, right, we can agree that a lot of the traits, a lot of the qualities that we have in the Western world, including democracy, understanding of politics, and whatnot, came from ancient Greece, right? They were the ones to set up the parameters. The Greco Roman traditions definitely laid the foundations of the Western world. So again, point being that there was a lot of interaction between ancient Greco-Roman traditions and ancient India. So some scholars are of the opinion that perhaps that merging, that dialogue, may have also led to certain rituals or certain sensibilities that were then adopted by Tantra. And in ancient India too, there were certain practices that were paganist in their origin. They were surrounding fertility rituals and honoring the divine feminine aspect. So a lot of those practices eventually got subsumed within Tantra before it became so sophisticated a path as we know right now. And it also went through many centuries of evolution, and many different streams of thought emerged within Tantra. So from the so-called Hindu perspective, when I say so-called, it's because the word Hindu or Hinduism itself is a British construct mainly, but we can use that for lack of a better word because it's a very vast tradition in itself. You know, there are people who believe in the god Shiva or Ganesha and Vishnu, and initially, all these paths were quite unique on their own, you know. And if you investigate their scriptures, even let's say within the tradition that belongs to Shiva, there could be even disagreements. There are different traditions that are, some are non dual in nature, some are highly dualistic, but they both believe in Shiva, but even their individual approach could be different from one another. So, this tradition also has a tantric tradition, both dualistic and non-dualistic. Same with the Ganesha tradition and whatnot, and then Buddhism as well. So it's a very vast topic to cover in a short lecture, of course, but I'm trying to narrow it down as much as I can. So, in a nutshell, basically, the tantric tradition, traditionally speaking, um, carries across both Hindu and Buddhist tradition. There were some other traditions too, which are not that prominent anymore. So currently, I think in the 21st century, if we say which traditions are currently existing and are continuing to thrive, it's both the Hindu and Buddhist tradition. Now, these traditions, why they are important and how do they differ from mainstream thought? So, of course, both Hinduism and Buddhism have what is called a more orthodox, a more exoteric out. And Tantra is the more esoteric, mystical path, wherein the inquiry turns more inwards, and there's a lot of work with understanding the subtle body. Also, in yoga, you use the subtle body, but in Tantra, it's taken to a different dimension. That there are yogic practices in Tantra too, where we do use physical postures and we work with our body too. But ultimately, a lot of the work that happens is internal, working with what we call the subtle energy points and the subtle yogic body, the subtle body with chakras, different energy points, and whatnot. But the ultimate point here is that Tantra does not shun the world, it does not shun matter in favor of the spirit. It's more like an alchemical process wherein both mind and matter learn to coexist with one another instead of one favoring the other, one excluding the other. And even there, it's a gradual path. For certain practitioners, they can proceed from tantric paths that are more outer in nature, where there is some emphasis on external, and then they can gradually, as they train progressively on the path under the guidance of a teacher, they can go more inwards, where they're more confidence perceiving their own inner world, their human body, as divine, and the energies contained as divine. So, in a nutshell, that's the explanation of traditional Tantra. Now, you might be wondering that how then in the West this misunderstanding happened. Why was Tantra equated with sexual practices? So, if in my understanding, it all stems back to Osho. He was definitely one of the people responsible for it because originally he was an initiated tantric teacher from India, but I think when he moved to the States and then he came up with this idea of some kind of like free sexuality, or some people even tell me that perhaps he intended in a particular way, but his students and other people interpreted it differently. So anyhow, no matter what was the main cause, we could definitely say that a lot of such practices started from that time when Osho went to America. And we have to understand that that was a time where the American society was trying to break free from its orthodoxy, right? Because a lot of people were coming from a very orthodox version of Christianity or whichever religious tenets they were following, but they wanted to break free from that. It was also the dawn of the hippie movement. A lot of the people came here to Nepal, to India, where the hippie movement started in the late 60s, 70s. And during that time, of course, there were individuals who were able to get into traditional paths. Some hippies also became good Buddhist practitioners and teachers who are now even still teaching in the West. But then there was another stream where they misinterpreted or they misunderstood these teachings and they kind of extracted something. Symbolic language or symbolic teachings from traditional Tantra and misconstrued it to fit a certain narrative. Now, when it comes to sexual practices itself, uh, they are important, of course. I mean, especially like I said, that Tantra does not exclude the matter. So it's not that sexuality is ignored or is not talked about in Tantra. It is, but it's not done in the way how these kind of retreats or, the Neo Tantra movement, how it approaches that topic. So there's a big difference in the approach.
Yeah, thank you for sharing it. And probably just to highlight, I guess we have some echo when we speak together. So one, it's on my side. Could you please mute yourself? And then I do the same when you talk, then we avoid echo. Is it okay? So could
Yeah.
you just for a while put yourself on mute so I could a little bit comment? I mean, first and foremost, big thanks for sharing it. It's very interesting to understand where do these myths come from and how essential, especially nowadays when there is so much information online, to let's say stick to the source, and go for the original learning and try to investigate. So what was the initial point? Because otherwise, so many completely misleading studies are being born. I mean, it's nothing wrong, I believe, in a way that people look for something which resonates to them, but at least it's important to call it the proper way, right? And not to, let's say, misuse the tradition, misuse the term, and so on. But it's very interesting. Thank you. I didn't know it myself that it was in a way Osho responsible for creating this myth in the western part of the world. But I also would like to know, to what extent do you apply and how do you apply it in your life? Maybe even talking more about like you as a man, so how does it help you practically? Thank you.
Yeah. Is there still an echo?
There is an echo when we are both are not mute. So each time when I put myself on mute, there is no echo when you talk. But when I talk, please do the same, then we will avoid it, okay? But I go now on mute, so thanks.
Right. Yeah, so thank you for that question. So, if I understand correctly, you mean that how do I apply my knowledge in my day to day life, right? What I've learned. So that's a very good question. And as I was mentioning before, that with Tantra, traditional Tantra, whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism, the aspect is integration in the real world. So it's not about escapism. And this is a point that I've made quite often in my own teachings, also on my Instagram. I mentioned this topic quite often. It doesn't mean, however, that we sometimes don't seclude ourselves, because there are, especially in the initial phases of your training in any traditional paradigm, right? We receive teachings from our gurus, we receive initiations, we receive certain mantras, and sometimes even rituals or certain deities. It could be a masculine or a feminine deity, and we work with that mainly to alchemize ourselves, right? So there are many aspects in a tantric practitioner's journey, many moments where it is important to stay isolated, to stay in solitude, to do a traditional retreat. Now, that's another point I wanted to mention, that along with the word tantra, even the word retreat has been kind of misunderstood in the modern context. So when we talk about the word retreat in a traditional context, it means to, you could say, isolate, even though it's not the best word here, but like put yourself in a container where you're focusing on a practice, a given set of practice. It could be a yoga retreat where you're just with yourself, working on yourself, like harmonizing your energies, like whatever you've learned, either in a group setting or in an individual setting. You're honing those skills in a very safe and structured atmosphere where you're not interfering, like you're not mingling other things in your life, right? So that's what truly we mean by the word retreat. And especially in the tantric context, it is quite important to train in that, either with your teacher. If you receive instructions, there are different retreats where the teacher can be present throughout to guide you, and there are other aspects depending on your capacity and training where after receiving a given set of teachings, instructions from your teacher, you then do the retreat on your own, and you just apply the teachings that they have given you, and you just work with that. You do different sessions throughout the day and the night. You time the sessions, and that's the meaning of a traditional retreat. So yes, there are moments where it is important to do that, to harmonize our energies, to balance our mind. And then afterwards, what's most important is to integrate your learnings and experience from that retreat in real life, especially in traditional tantra, in Buddhist tantra, if I speak about that. Our teachers always say that the real work is in the post meditation, meaning that we can be excellent on our meditation cushions, right? Or on our yoga mats. We can do amazingly well. We can have great experiences, mystical experiences. But once we get up, once we confront our day to day life, maybe meet our spouse or, you know, interact with our kids or friends, then that's the real thing. That showcases us how much progress we have truly made. So, how does it align with your question? Is that that's the conscious effort that the tantric practitioner must do in their day-to-day life. Like if they're integrated in the society, like myself, then it is quite crucial to try to apply that knowledge, in the way of being, into investigating our mind, investigating our actions, and how we interact with others, and how much wisdom that we gained through our practice, how much of that we're really able to apply that, not only for ourselves, but are we able to make a positive impact on others? Now, I'm not saying that we have to deliberately go out there and preach and tell everyone that, hey, look at me, I'm a practitioner, I'm going to teach you. That's not what I mean, right? Point is that you just embody, you try to embody your practice, your learning by your behavior, by your energy, what you emanate outwardly, right? So that people can truly feel that. And also, you can connect with them on a more wholesome level. Because if, let's say, we are on a spiritual path, it be Tantra or whatever, but after that, if our ordinary ego increases more and we think of ourselves as special or better than others, then we are missing the point. Then that's not true integration. True integration is also not about shunning one thing for the other, that you might be extremely happy in a practice based environment, but when you go out and face the world. But if you get extremely irritated or agitated and things perturb you, then it means there's more work needs to be done there. So that's what I try to embody as well. I'm not sure if I am perfect with what I do, but I try to emulate the example of my teachers and try to stay grounded and try to stay also quite honest and real to myself too, and understand what shortcomings I have, and understand that, okay, if this particular aspect, this person annoyed me, or this situation annoyed me, then it's my own reflection, right? Like, it's not necessarily that person or that situation who did that. So if those situations happen, it is so important to immediately start reflecting inwards. And that's what I try to consciously do. Maybe I'm doing something, I don't know, but I try.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you because, my approach to life is as well when something is triggering me, then it's my accountability to deep dive. It's not about people around me, it's about myself. They just like trigger, they mirror me, but they show what's wrong. Let's say, yeah, the area where I need to look inside myself. And each time when I, apply this approach in a way, it brings back the responsibility to myself, to work on myself, how I can improve, how I can, let's say, switch my mindset. So why this is triggering me, what's behind these layers, maybe some childish trauma which I'm still carrying with me. And I'm also fascinating, how the energy works and how we attract people, let's say, to trigger our trauma, but finally not really to trigger. The point is to heal our trauma, to heal these areas of us. And I would rather call like people around us as the teachers. And I fully agree with you, that real life, it's probably the best teacher. And I love the joke, at least we had it within our yoga community, that the best test could be, how self-aware you are. Like, spend at least 1 week with your closest relatives in one house, and then you will see, it's much easier to, let's say, escape, sit somewhere in the cave, meditate, whatsoever, rather than really facing the real life. And then it will show you, And the same, at least, understanding or reflection of mine is when it comes to, let's say, partnership, being in relationship. I know that nowadays it's very common that sometimes people pursue, more, let's say, independent lifestyle. The approach, at least in the Western world, is a little bit changing towards relationship. I see more people, let's say, tend to be standalone, not really willing to like build some partnership or whatsoever. But for me, it's also something, or the way how you make your ecosystem more complex, right? And then you have like you have to have a bigger heart, let's put it this way, to be in the position to capture all of this. Like when you have your partner, when you have kids, work, whatsoever, and all of these people, they're part of you. So it's much more difficult for you, let's say, to keep in mind all of these aspects and make sure that you are still within integrity, right? That you are not losing yourself. Or if you are, then let's say, you could go for whatever kind of reflections, so what's in it for me. And I guess this is the most fascinating. So I also would love to probably hear your, experience. Yeah, if it's fine for you to share, of course, when it comes to relationship. I guess this is probably the most, let's say, attractive on one hand, the most beautiful thing, if it like works in a harmony, that could happen to us. But on another hand, it's also like the such a closeness where you could be, touched too much, triggered too much. And of course, again, it requires us constantly to self-reflect, integrate, make some changes. And of course, as long as it works like mutually, then I guess something beautiful could grow out of it. So what about your experience in this regard? If there were some specific triggers, how did you face them? How did you work with them? How did you integrate? Or, yeah, any interesting takeaways from your side on this regard? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your reflections about relationship as well. And I think what you mentioned is quite true. And to answer your question, I mean, having gone through different relationships in my life and spiritual partnerships as well, I would say that relationships have been one of the biggest learnings in my path. Because, of course, I feel myself quite fortunate to have found amazing traditions and amazing teachers who are, like very well trained in a textbook way, and uh, I've sought a lot of protection and support from them, and that's also shaped me into who I am. But I would also say that a lot of my personal experience also came a lot through interactions with my partners, on the path, right? And as you said quite beautifully and correctly, that when you are spending that time with another in a very intimate capacity, and when I say intimate, it's not only, of course, limited to sexuality, right? That's one part of it. But intimacy is more about a very soul to soul, heart to heart connection where a man and a woman could be truly open to one another. And of course, in such a communion, anything can happen, right? Especially when we become quite vulnerable. And I think, as a psychologist, I think that you may encounter these things also with your clients quite often, especially when people have difficulties being vulnerable with each other, because it might trigger the other, it might bring up some fears, and it could make people a bit, you could say, hesitant to open up or connect with others. And I can understand that, especially in our modern world, it can be difficult sometimes, because if people have not done enough work and if there's some imbalance, then it makes it a bit hard to have full trust and have full cognition of that situation. But I would say that, this is where, if I were to apply tantric knowledge into the relationship scenario, we can learn a lot. Because, if we talk about one of the key aspects, it's about the balance of the male and the masculine and feminine in tantra, in both Hindu Tantra and Buddhist Tantra. So let's say if we talk about the idea of Shiva and Shakti, right, the divine play of the masculine and feminine. So that's also what we can learn from. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily become like gods or our relationships turn into some kind of like spiritual fantasy. I'm not necessarily saying that, but we can take an example from that and really working on ourselves, looking into ourselves, if we are, if we embody in this human life, if we are a man, then working with not only our inner masculine but also working with the inner feminine, like really going deeper into that side, and vice versa for a woman to work with the inner masculine alongside the inner feminine. So this is also what I learned in my own experiences and my relationships, that yes, I can have textbook education, I can have a lot of scriptural knowledge from my teachers, from all these ancient texts, but without relating to my feminine counterpart, a lot of those things I could not have actualized to the degree I have now. So I would even say that I consider those women who have walked alongside me, who have been in my life, also as my teachers in this capacity. That I learned a lot about myself and relating with, the opposite sex through them. And with this kind of knowledge, I think it is quite possible to integrate even when one is by oneself, right? Let's say if they're not in a relationship particularly, but how to embody both the masculine and feminine inside for a man and for a feminine, how to simultaneously embody the feminine and masculine.
Uh, just a second. Very well said. And I can only relate to it, because for me is as well, like relationships used to be the biggest, let's say, learning in my life. And maybe at some point of time when I was there, it felt like the most demanding and the thing which in a way at some point of time even broke me. But on another hand, now looking backwards, I see how much I got out of it, how much I learned. And I'm so grateful, to all of this experience. And maybe I just could compliment, that yeah, it's really fascinating that all what happens in our life, my impression is it's all happens for us, with the greatest purpose, with the purpose, let's say, to, I would say it's the feeling of freedom, each time when I'm like able to change my mindset, and finally I feel like I'm getting bigger, that my heart gets bigger, my mind gets bigger. I can, let's say, um somehow like cover more, let's say, situations, right? I'm less exposed to some triggers, and it's quite often also like thanks to relationship. And I'm still investigating a lot, and maybe I could share, because I'm now like going through a very strong transformation, which turned out like already as a life journey. I would say all started, as I see, in a way, that's me as a kid, as a little girl, probably did not get enough attention from my dad, and somehow I replicated this approach in my life, like chasing the men who are also not given, let's say, enough attention, who are a bit more avoidant, because finally, the interesting thing is that my trauma wants to be healed, so it goes for it, like, please, like, push there once again, because finally maybe I could do something with it. And it's obviously not clear from the very beginning, it's so deep on subconscious level. And yeah, I spent probably 12 years of my marriage in this kind of relationship, where I was like giving myself away so much, kind of was not really having value. And finally, even more interesting, I had no idea who I am, because I had this, let's say, approach that I have to stick to somebody, despite, let's say, like financially, career wise, I was pretty much independent, but emotionally, I could not stay on my own. And I didn't know who I am. At that time, I even, there was no even such a concept for me. I had to have a partner to whom I'm next to. This is how I felt, like the partner, the man for me is in the middle and me next to him. Um, and then after some time, when, let's say, due to some, let's say, situations, but again, it had to happen, I felt my feminine side very much destroyed. I finally went for myself, because I realized, I mean, I'm so much dependent, emotionally dependent on this man, that if I'm not going to build my own self, with my own pillars, with my own things, let's say, my friendship circle, my interests, whatsoever, which supports me, gives me energy, fills me in, then I mean, I will be lost completely, and I started like step by step, to look in what could fill me in, what's about myself, like trying, investigating a little bit, putting all these puzzles together, like little by little. And finally, yeah, when I guess brought myself back, when I recovered my feminine side as well, I understood that there is unfortunately no place for me here, and I left. But what was even more interesting, in the next relationship, um, I mean, at that point of time after my marriage, I thought that I was doing all right, and there was nothing that much wrong in me. But finally, my next partner reflected to me so much, my own behavior before. And despite, like, if we could say from the moral perspective, my ex-partner was not always like right. But again, it was for me, I'm not like pushing back the responsibility. It was supposed to happen, and big things that it happened. But what I'm trying to say, that I looked backwards and I understood that also my behavior was so needy. I was pleasing that man all the time, because I was just lacking this love, right? Self value, and I didn't have it on my own. So I had to play all this theater all the time, prepare all these dances just to give this feeling. But it's like a black hole, inside of you, because nobody else can fill it in except yourself. And yeah, I'm so grateful how life is showing us, and finally, I guess it's even now happening to me, that I understood that that was my mechanism of survival, to stick to somebody, in my opinion, to a man. Somehow I was like choosing men of probably type of my father when I was a young kid, that's a bit more avoidant. But on another hand, I'm so happy to meet somehow so far it's still loneliness. I hope it will one day transition into solitude. This is something that I hope will I will embrace one day soon. But in this loneliness, there is me, with all my pain, with all my weakness, with all my fear to be alone. And again, it's not, that I cannot handle somehow life. Absolutely, I'm so good in managing the things, but it's more about here, and I guess it's probably the true way finally to meet myself. And I believe that later on, I could also probably meet a partner or a man who already see this value in me because I have it for my own. I won't go again for, let's say, chasing or like probably even triggering something. And even more interesting, like a reflection or insight, the recent one. I went for a date, and my previous impression was that as long as I'm very much emotionally fascinated of what is going on, excited from the first second, then this is the right thing. That was for me like as the triggering mechanism that this is the man I want to be with, or develop and look and so on. But this like recent dates, finally I came back and I was talking to my friend and I said, you know what, it's a very nice man. I felt so much safe and secure next to him. I even like cried a little bit while sharing my story or whatever, and it was just first time we saw each other, which was not typical for me. So I was not playing any, I was not even like preparing much, because I felt okay, I am the one who I am. I don't want to like overperform anymore. I just don't have this idea or energy for it. I literally feel such a fatigue in my body each time when I start overperforming. It means that again some my mechanism is triggered. But now I'm so grateful to my body that it tells me no, it's the wrong way. No, 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 stop here. And now think once again. So finally, I was telling my friend that yeah, I felt in a way very very good, just like very calm. I mean, I didn't feel anything, much exciting. So probably he's not the one now, or he's not of the same, let's say, mindset as I am, because he was not really much interested in my career path, in my spiritual path, but in like normal basic things, it was really funny and easygoing and so on. And then I realized that, by telling that something was kind of not enough, I basically could not find the trigger to activate my past story. And this is how my system used to work. It was always looking for something, let's say, a certain space, as I believe, where I was like putting a man a bit ahead of me, and thinking, okay, now I have a space to run after him, because he's like more intelligent, more educated, more successful, more self-aware, whatsoever, and then I could play my let's say my pattern, which was kind of helpful for me in the past. But now I understood, probably it's not working anymore. I hope so. I'm like also, let's say, testing, what situations does life bring to me. But I believe it could also be that it's not working anymore. And finally, I guess that something more meaningful and healthy could start exactly with the peaceful, beginning, which I never had in my life, because I believe that only this crazy passion fire is exactly, the thing that you need to go for. And I'm also very wondering, and I'm very curious about how it's going to develop. And you were also mentioning about the masculine and feminine, Shiva and Shakti concept in Hinduism. So I'm wondering, so what's the idea? Because I guess, at least my impression is that the balance of feminine and masculine in the modern world is a bit confused. So, what does the tradition say, and what's your as well practical impression? So what's the real balance for you between masculine and feminine energies? I mean, I know that we both have anima and animus, right? We both have all of these, let's say, energy types in us. But when we meet, still, you as a man represent more like feminine, masculine, and me bringing, let's say, as a woman, more feminine. So when we meet each other, right? So how you feel is the best way to balance, let's say? What's your impression? And maybe also it would be interesting to hear what does the tradition say about it.
So thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story with me, and I could relate a lot with that, especially the points where you mentioned about the childhood situation, certain childhood traumas, if I may say so, experiences that can shape even our adult life. And I think that's quite an important reflection that we all must have. That the way we relate with others in a relationship, with our significant others, certainly carries a lot of imprint from our childhood. And there could be some kind of neediness or connection with our parents, with our mom, with our dad, that can play out in certain ways too. And then in many ways, it can create certain imbalances as well, right? That we kind of subconsciously put our partner on a particular position, right? There's a lot of projection that we can do in that regard, and it can ripple outward. Sometimes we don't even recognize that, we don't even realize it because it's so ingrained in our system, and that when we meet someone who becomes our life partner and we spend all our time with them, then the dynamic gets so interwoven that oftentimes we just don't even realize, the way we are, the way we are being, it's so automatic, and it just like it feels natural. But of course there's a lot of background behind that, if we start investigating. And that's also what I learned in my own relationships, like the way I related with certain people who came into my life, and the certain qualities that they were carrying, and why that happened as well. And ultimately, from the tantric perspective, to answer your question too, it still all boils down to ourselves. It all boils down to our own inner nature, that the people who enter our life, especially you could say in a relationship dynamic, they too are reflections of ourselves in one way or the other, right? So if, let's say, we meet someone who constantly triggers us, right, it also means that that's a reflection of something wounded inside of us, some parts that we haven't truly seen yet, we haven't truly healed or transformed yet. And that's okay. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a shortcoming, but that's also something I learned from one of my recent relationship stories, that yeah, perhaps there were some loops that I hadn't really closed, and that was enabling particular scenarios to come. And I think what you also mentioned about this person, the date that you had, and what you realize in that journey too. And my experience in learning, I've also seen that sometimes, let's say, after the dissolution of a very long relationship, let's say, right, until and unless we have kind of closed that particular loop, life will show us certain examples with similar kind of people who enter our life, right? Like we might find some connection with them, but as we get closer, we might realize that no, some patterns are repeating. And why is that? Because we did not exactly close that existing loop. We did not end that, and that's why it's perpetuating. And I think for people like ourselves who are more spiritually attuned, we are, you could say, tapping into the cosmic source more, right? You're more aware. Such situations might happen more than usual until and unless we truly learn. I wouldn't say to learn a lesson, that sounds more like harsh, but you could say we gain learning. We gain learning from the residues, or like what was left behind, or what was the point that we did not exactly heal. Are we still blaming the other for what happened, or we are taking more responsibility inwards, right? And until and unless we do that, some situations can play out. It could be people carrying similar energy, or certain situations in our life that perhaps indirectly show us that we need to close a loop, like, hey, I'm here. Don't forget about me, right? It can make a surprise appearance in our life. So, why am I saying this? Is because it is indeed linked with a more traditional understanding of the masculine and feminine energy as well. Because Shiva and Shakti, if we talk more from the inner tantric perspective, yeah, they can be seen as gods or deities, in a more ritualistic sense. But on a more innate, on a more esoteric level, they are energies. Basically, they connect with our own consciousness, right? Our own, you could say, divine consciousness. That is not something we increase; it is inherent. We have to tap into it. We make it more and more manifest, right? And how it can be manifest in a more lucid way is when we engage in this work, when we look deep inside of ourselves, when we have honest reflections into the innermost aspects of our being, right? When we search for those answers inside first instead of going outwards. If you're doing that, let's say as a man, if you're doing that, you're embodying Shiva energy already. As a woman, if you're doing that, you're embodying Shakti principle because then you're not afraid of what lies inside. Because, both Shiva and Shakti, too, if you look at some of the imagery, even traditional tantric imagery, you will see that they do not look like, or, like they're not super, how do I frame it correctly? Um, they're radical in a way the way they look, especially Shiva. I mean, look at him. I mean, he's a yogi, he's an ascetic, and in many of his traditional images, he's shown communing with spirits, even, or he lives in areas or environments that are questionable. And Shakti also manifests as Kali, as Durga, who could be wild, ferocious, right? So if we have such an imagery, it is not there for no reason. It's not just folklore. Because in Tantra, all symbolism has a deep meaning. The symbolism ultimately points at our own inner consciousness, right? So when we start looking at the difficult emotions inside of ourselves, right, then we are confronting those challenging aspects. So let's say if I compare with the Shiva energy, if Shiva in a traditional context is dwelling in dangerous looking environments, in mountains alone, in forests with some spirits or disturbing energies around him, if we do similar work inside of ourselves, right, by confronting that is dark, by confronting that is seemingly dangerous, that is seemingly taboo to our minds, then we are engaging in Shiva work. Now, for a woman too, similarly, if she is also willing to step beyond the confines of, the ordinary societal conception of things too. Because another point I wanted to mention from my own experiences, I feel that, um, and correct me if I'm wrong, I also feel that still in even in the Western world, there can be a lot of pressure on people and women, especially like, by the time you are 30, you're supposed to get married, have kids, and there's lots of expectations, right? And unfortunately, those expectations also pressurizes people sometimes to not choose their partner wisely, right? Because falling in love and having chemistry doesn't necessarily mean that the partner is right for you, right? Because we can fall in love, we can have excellent chemistry with someone, but are they truly aligned, like you were saying before, with our ideas, with our values? They don't have to be a carbon copy of us too, I'm not saying that, but there should be some kind of attuning, some kind of intertwining with the path. So if we buckle under societal pressure and we feel that, oh no, I have to get married, I have to date, what are my peers going to say, what is my family going to talk about this, right? And then we fall into that societal pressure, and then we just give way to instincts and we connect with someone, but we soon find out the relationship fizzles out. Why that happens is because we give in to the societal pressure. So I think embodying the Shakti principle would be, I'm not saying that we become rebels, of course. And my point is that we don't necessarily give so much heed to the external noise above us. We look deep inside of ourselves as a woman, who look deep inside of oneself and see who I truly am, what I'm embodying currently, where do I want to go ahead in the future. And from that refined perspective, from that clarity, is when we can truly manifest a partner for ourselves. That will become, in my opinion, true Shakti work. And this is how we can intertwine both Shiva and Shakti principle together.
Yeah, very beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing it. I fully relate as well. And um, on another hand, I believe it's almost, at least my life experience is that I believe it's impossible, to get to know yourself without, let's say, outside triggers. So I, on one hand, agree, and it like very typical for my culture as well, that people used to get married quite early, and then kids and so on without being connected to themselves at all. And of course, then many problems started at some point, and not many couples were in the position to manage them properly. They were just like stuck in all of these conflicts and so on, and were not really able to understand so what's the problem behind. But I hardly can imagine someone to, let's say, explore him or herself on her own, without having these external triggers. So I hardly can imagine, how I could pass this journey to myself before I go into relationship, or like build a partnership or marriage or also a family, without like going through this journey where I got all of these insights, and takeaways for myself. And it's also very interesting to see how the society, the culture, the even politics whatsoever are impacting our decisions, way of thinking, also the way we build the relationship. Let's say, it's interesting to see that for my culture, the pattern stayed even after the Second World War, that women at some point became, let's say, more masculine. I mean, on one hand, in my culture, women look extremely feminine, but it's like outside, but inside, these are very strong women who are able to handle their family, like earn money, be very much socially developed, and so on. And sometimes it feels like it's unfortunately, it's quite common that women are a bit, like parenting the men, which is for me already a very huge disbalance. But I see where does it come from. I believe it's still coming from the Second World War, when that made sense, when men were gone to do the war, some of them did not return, and indeed woman was supposed to like handle and carry this pretty much masculine energy. But yeah, unfortunately, I mean, not speaking about these days when the war is again there, but I mean, it was still long time after the Second World War where probably we could recover, and go back a little bit more to this feminine side, but this pattern somehow stayed. On contrary, also very interesting to observe how does the Western European world is being developed, where women went so much for their rights, for independency, which at least my impression again is that it creates certain disbalance again. It's also more going into the masculine energies in a way. But there is one symbol, I guess it's a Hindu symbol, but I'm afraid to be wrong. But maybe I could share later on. There is a beautiful picture, where the man, I previously thought that it's Shiva and Shakti, but finally these are not them. The name of the symbol is a bit different, but the picture like represents a man in the meditation, a strong one, and woman over him, like a bit more with a crazy energy. So for me, it's a very beautiful, representation of what I believe the proper balance of feminine and masculine in a partnership is, where the man brings, the grounded, stable, strong energy. And we are about emotions, where like we are really sometimes a little bit crazy, because today we cry, tomorrow we laugh, after tomorrow we are angry, then we're super calm, and so on. But yeah, this is our cycle, moon, whatever. And but this is exactly what brings lots of inspiration, lots of creativity. And I mean, men used to be more hunters, we more the gardeners, right? Because we take care of the place of home, and make the place to be, let's say, willing to be back home. And in a way, for me, it's like exactly the beautiful balance between male and female energies, where men still represents more the strong side, and woman is a bit more hectic, but very creative. And I really hope, that at least this is my purpose even of this meeting, to bit encourage this balanced way when people meet together. But also, I truly believe that before that stage, it's really very important to look inside yourself. And like, yeah, of course, as I said, we learn through the relationship. Yeah, this is exactly probably the best school where you could either heal or get more stuck in your patterns, triggers, and so on. But as long as we work with ourselves, I guess that in a partnership, in relationship, we could also create something much more beautiful. So we are slightly approaching the end of our live stream, and maybe you could just like share your impression, about this feminine masculine balance, while we're coming to an end shortly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those profound reflections. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think there's an important point you mentioned about this relatability with another, right? Like you were saying before that how sometimes it could be difficult to, like, if you're not spending that time, if you're not sharing that intimate space with someone, perhaps reflecting on those points could be difficult. This is what you had mentioned before. And I think, yeah, that's quite true. And I also had certain situations like that in my own life. There was more codependency, and even in a spiritual context, and then only afterwards I realized that, those things were happening and they became a subconscious pattern. But I believe that still, even when we are in a relationship, it is so important to find time for ourselves when we are relating with ourselves too, right? Individually. That's very important for both the man and the woman.
Yeah, that probably would be my final question to you. How do you believe, people, let's say, being together could create this very close connection, intimacy, right? Where we share vulnerabilities, pain, passion, all of us, but also still, yeah, be in the position to maintain the independence where it's about yourself. So being able to meet within integrity, but also stay like separately within integrity.
Yeah. Very good question. And I think, first of all, what is important here is that both the male and female in that relationship should have a level of respect for one another. That is so important, right? And they should be, I mean, it can happen sometimes, of course, in relationships where some kind of like maybe jealousy or triggers can come. So I think it's so crucial for such individuals who are coming in a relationship who can be highly talented, highly creative, successful in their own right, to have like clear boundaries, clear, healthy boundaries that um, their personal work, what they do, is not a threat to the relationship. It's not a threat to another person, And I also had certain situations like that in my past, which I learned, and I understood that what is so healthy in this case is to cultivate very compassionate attitude towards one another, and to ensure that we are not being jealous or competitive. And if we have that kind of energy, even if, let's say, there's some kind of agreement that, well, I mean, of course, we'll do a lot of time spending together and building together, but I have this project, that's my passion project. I need time for that. Maybe I need to go for a tantric retreat to Nepal, for example, right? That's important for my self growth. So the significant other should naturally support that. They should come to this natural agreement that this isn't the threat to them. This isn't the threat to the relationship. On the contrary, this could, in fact, enhance the quality of the relationship. So I think this can only happen by having very concrete, beautiful dialogues between both partners to come to a mutual agreement, not in a very official way, of course, but a heart to heart agreement, and then coming to some kind of common ground. And then only I believe that an equilibrium could be had. Otherwise, there can always be some kind of power struggles and disbalance there.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you so much. And probably as we're approaching the end of our stream, I just would like to say to our audience, that from the bottom of my heart, I really wish that all of us have courage enough to, let's say, face our vulnerabilities, face our pains sometimes, but still go for it, go for something more beautiful, for, let's say, at least a desire, attempt to create a beautiful partnership in a harmony. It's never easy, I guess. But as long as we have this courage, to look inside ourselves, to work on ourselves, to reflect, and keep responsibility. Please keep responsibility within you. Always ask, so what's about me, right? It's never about others, never. It's all about us. And yeah, other people are just like great mirrors and great teachers. So let's go this way, let's cultivate what life is bringing to us and what it tries to teach us, because finally, I mean, after this, there is such a great feeling of freedom, of happiness, of probably true and genuinely life. So I wish that everybody could like go there, to make the life as genuine as possible, and like less staying within conflicts, inner conflicts, or tearing emotions and so on. So that's my greatest wish to everyone. And again, like big thanks to everyone whom I met on my journey, because That was amazing experience as well, and very great learning, and I appreciate it. And big thanks to all of these souls. And thank you, Ankit, as well. It's such a great pleasure. I mean, to talk to you. I really love your perspective, how you dig into these things, and also from the traditional point of view, which is probably not that much relevant. So it's very beautiful to discover this part too. So I appreciate really very much. And if you want to say something to our audience as well, we will leave this record of this stream. So I guess that somebody could watch it later as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your reflections. I was really pleased to be on this stream and have this amazing conversation with you, sharing our perspective. And I think one last thing that I want to say, add to this conversation, is that ultimately I believe that the key word is respect, having a lot of respect for oneself and others. And if we have that, and again, if we talk from a more traditional Buddhist perspective, having a compassionate view, when we have compassion for oneself, then we can also have compassion for others, right? When we
Yeah.
have this holistic perspective, it makes our relationships, not only in a romantic capacity, but with our friends, with our colleagues, with
Mhm.
everyone in our life, things become more easier, because then we can understand that just like me, if I want happiness, others want happiness too. If I want to be seen and heard, others want the same. So if we expand on this view, that definitely enriches our lives, and then it can create even more holistic relationships. And I think even something that looks so simple but sometimes difficult to incorporate, even this one point, in my opinion, can improve the quality of our romantic relationships too. That's what I have to
Absolutely.
say.
Good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, your interest, your presence, your knowledge, and everything. It was a great pleasure for me talking to you. I learned myself a lot as well. And I guess I even feel like I want to, reflect a little bit, think, integrate, because it was so much insightful. Thank you so much. I wishing you a lovely day ahead, and as well, big thanks to all of our audience too. So good. Enjoy the day. Ciao, ciao. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, you
Bye.
too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.